Hello, my fellow listeners and lovers of knowledge. Welcome to the Open Sea Odyssey podcast. My name is Josiah Vogel, and as usual, I am joined by my co-host, Kylan Bain. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at what is wisdom, what makes wisdom, how do we gain wisdom, and why is there such a lack of it. So, without any further ado, welcome to the Open Sea Odyssey podcast. How would you define wisdom?
Right. You know, I've said frequently, and for some reason, I've found a lot of potency in this phrasing that knowledge is found within books and wisdom is found within story. And so, wisdom is applied knowledge experientially. And so when you have a story, you don't have necessarily the factoids and informational qualities in isolation, but you have them within an embedded context. And so wisdom would be that knowledge in mesh with a experienced context from which that knowledge was applied.
Okay. I think I've said my definition before, which is more in line with John Vervaeke. So it's similar to yours, which is you have experience and then you have knowledge, and it takes both of those to make wisdom. Now, what's interesting, based off of this concept, we've been kind of sharing this idea of strong gods.
Yeah.
I don't know if wisdom is a strong god, because let's go to Christendom. If I went to a monastery and was seeking information, I could find 3 different monks that all overlap onto this issue that I am having and get 3 different, or 3 overlapping with different interpretations on how to go about this problem. All 3 of those, because these people have studied these things, would be wisdom. At least in those days, we would think of someone that has spent that much time as wisdom. But the issue and the problem I'm trying to solve is not going to be solved by just one of those answers. It's going to be an amalgamation of me taking that and being like, okay, so here's what I'm being advised to look for, here's what I'm being advised to ignore or not pay attention to. That way when it comes up, I can be fully in flow state, focused on like, oh, this is what they were talking about. I believe this is what they were talking about in this scenario. It fits that. Here's how I'm going to handle it. Because I don't think anything ever pops up the same way. I think there are times where you think about working on a car. It's like, oh, okay, we're getting oil spewing from the main engine block. This could be head gasket issue. Okay, but the oil's not creamy. So there's not a mixing of fluids to actually make it a head gasket issue. But it is still spewing oil from the main engine. So what's going on here, right? And I think that is a good example in of itself, because I've been currently having a problem with my car.
Oh, no. The Subaru.
No, not the Subaru,
Okay.
the Toyota.
Oh, no.
And I've gotten so many different, because no one's there to see it, of, well, this is what you need to look for, this is probably what the problem is, and then having to go out and be like, okay, taking that knowledge, I can then, with the ones that have said it's probably a head gasket issue, I check the oil, it's not creamy, even after running it and fixing some things, it's still not creamy. Okay, so it's probably not the head gasket. That's how I would define wisdom, is that it's something of more of a guiding hand, rather than, for instance, to use your epistemic matrix, I don't think it's authoritative.
No. Yeah, and, you know, I think you bring up a really good point, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but I know with wisdom there's a very specified interpretation and exploration of a particular quality because it's experiential. It's specified to a particular experience. And so I would say that wisdom is in that one specific instance of wisdom is very stable. It's a very stable way of knowing because it's grounded in that experience. Now, to translate that wisdom into your lived experience. Take the monk, for example. They have this very stable, grounded knowing within experience. And to take that out of that grounded experience, you need knowledge. And so, but I think knowledge is a very unstable type of knowing in its isolation, because it can become immensely transient, and we find ourselves lost in liminality because of that. And so it's, if we're taking the arc of the hero's journey, you take that, you come out of experience by taking that wisdom into knowledge, into the underworld of knowledge, into that kind of transient instability, and then you bring it back into your experience. It creates new stability through your experience, creating more knowledge.
Right. Yeah, I think that's about right. But to be philosophical here, what do you mean by experience? Are you meaning more like the post-structuralist, where it's all about what I experience, my perception of the world, completely absent, almost in a vacuum, although we're not supposed to be in a vacuum post-structurally, of the other world's experience of everything, that because that can't be trusted as absolute truth, I should trust my own perception? Or do you mean experience, for instance, in I read your Substack, and the idea of, okay, well, you have this ritual, which is more of a, I don't want to say concrete, but a tradition that is passed down that has a ton of value that one then participates in to gain the experience of the understanding of those who came before them that had the same or a similar experience. I would probably say in that instance there's more overlap than individual experience. So with that laid out, I'll be a little more specific. So are you meaning post-structuralist in the way we think of today, although I wouldn't argue this is post-structuralist? Right. So let's rephrase it as contemporary views of experience. Are you saying in the sense of, okay, well, it's my complete experience, it's never been done before, right? Or are you saying more in line with what you were talking about in the ritual aspect, where it's something that has been experienced by severals before you, but of course you're going to have your own individual experience within that, but it's still not it's not a complete vacuum to the past, and it's not a complete vacuum to your experience. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I think I mean more of the latter, where it's embedded within a broader context than yourself. And I reference story as an amalgamation to wisdom, because when you read a narrative, it's embedded within that multiplicity of layers. And so it's not only your experience, it's not only your subjective in a vacuum experience, but a character within a story deriving some knowledge has to interact with other experiences as well. And mythology is a really good example of this. It's multidimensional, and it's grounded. It's integrated, and I would say completely enmeshed in the way in which you derived such knowing. You can't isolate the knowing from the way in which you got the knowing. And so knowledge can be transient from how you understood that thing. That relativity makes it very applicable to a variety of experience, because you can take that piece of knowledge and then you can apply it to all those multiplicity of experiences of individuals who are interpreting such knowledge. With experience, you have this kind of this lock of that which is known and how you got to that which you know. And so that interlocking is incredibly strong, and I think that's the weight that I'm trying to describe with wisdom. Yeah, well, and to go down a quick rabbit hole, that's what I see to be the biggest problem in storytelling and entertainment today, is that there is a huge lack of wisdom, shared knowledge, and experience between people. I'm a Star Wars fan. Yeah. And it drives me nuts when people are like, Star Wars is not a kid's movie. And it's like, do you think the story of Perseus and Medusa is a kid's story? Oh, 100% is a kid's story. But it's such a good kid's story because it's something that you can go back to at 30
at 40, at 50, at 70, at 80, and still enjoy the story and still get something out of it. Or if you've forgotten something, be reminded of something that is of value from that story that is shared among that culture, or just being human.
And the knowing is implicit.
Yeah.
Like within wisdom, it's not hyper cerebral and, oh, I know this now because I have this definition and this substructure of the definition. It's very implicit, and it reaches your heart before it reaches your head.
Right. Yeah.
And I really think that we don't have a contemporary means of conveying that anymore.
Yeah. Do you want to delve into the why there's a lack of wisdom already, or do you want to keep going on about wisdom?
We can keep going about what it is, because I think, building a foundation about what the hell we're talking about gives a good counterpoint to where it is.
I wouldn't disagree. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and it's very difficult for me not to want to go into the what is it not part to show what's going on, why there's a lack of it, because that is a lot easier for me. I think wisdom is such a to take like Kant and noumena and phenomena. Noumena is that which we cannot have access to. Like, who is God? I don't know. But noumena is to the degree that even the things that are like, oh, well, this tells us about God. The reason why Kant labels it noumena is, well, even with all that information, you still can't say this is God.
Yeah.
You can't even say, well, we know this about God. It's like, well, these are the things we've learned, but I can't make a definitive claim. Sort of like go to Kierkegaard. He talks about in, I think it's Philosophical Fragments or Sickness and Death, or Sickness unto Death. He talks about how one should always be scared of creating a claim of who God is for fear that it will always be destroyed, because all it takes is someone to come in and find one thing wrong with it, and it puts the entire structure into question of, okay, what is God? So I don't think wisdom is that degree to noumena, but I think there are many things about wisdom that I would say would go into noumena, because I mean, I guess the best way to put it is, to me, it makes me think of Theaetetus from Plato and the concept of what is knowledge. I mean, can you define knowledge without giving me an example? It's a very hard thing where it's just like, what are you talking about? It's just information. Okay, well, now we're just playing syllogisms and all of that of, okay, well, not a syllogism. We're just playing, what's the word? I'm not going to remember it, but we're just substituting other words that are just like that word that doesn't really define
synonyms.
The word. Synonyms, yes, thank you. It doesn't define the word at all, like knowledge, information. Well, knowledge isn't really just information. There's something about it for also knowing about the information. But I still can't define the word because I just said knowing, and I'm using information, which is an example. So I think wisdom is kind of in that category, or leaning towards the noumena, where it's like, I don't know if it's something that we can make fully concrete to understand, but that's where I would lean into your epistemic matrix on the authoritative to some degree of the religion and faith, because it's like, but it's not authoritative in that sense, because it's like, I can't really say this is the case. It's more of like a Kierkegaardian, or Aristotelian idea of, I'm taking it on faith. I'm treating it as self-evident until enough proof shows otherwise. But at the same time, I mean, again, that's the whole thing that's difficult. I can't even define knowledge.
Yeah.
And yet it takes knowledge to make wisdom. I can easily give you more grounded examples of experience, and I could define it. But I'd struggle with knowledge, which then makes it difficult to define wisdom. which is why I was kind of hesitant on really creating a concrete version of it. So this is where this gets more into your work, where it's like, okay, well, like John Vervaeke's work is very similar, where he sits there and he goes, okay, but there are things from the past that seem to give people this home to be able to understand things and be able to gain knowledge, to apply their experience to root themselves in wisdom. But what are those things? Do those things always work? And I think those are very, very important questions. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
You know, when I would say, if I'm trying to show somebody viscerally within a context that's similar to my own, I'm not going to say that this is universal, but within my context, if I'm trying to show somebody the difference between knowledge and wisdom, I would hand them 2 books. I would say one of these is knowledge and one of these is wisdom. I would hand them a logic textbook, and I would hand them a book by J.R.R. Tolkien. So if I were to define it within a contemporary context, it would be, I would hand them 2 books. One would be this logic textbook that I'm currently going through for class. I would say, this is knowledge.
Right.
And then I'd hand them the book, The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien. I'd say, this is wisdom. Both you retrieve knowing from, but the way in which you retrieve that knowing is completely different.
Yes.
This knowledge textbook is very definition-based, and from those definitions, it creates structures, and from those structures, it creates ideas, and from those ideas, it creates theories, and and that's how it extrapolates. It's very particle-based. With wisdom, it's the entirety. You can't break it down the way you can break down knowledge because it's embedded within the story that you're telling.
Yeah, it's Gestalt.
Right, very. And so, this is what makes these epistemologies so insightful, is because we don't, to your point, defining knowledge is incredibly difficult, but we can pinpoint ways in which knowledge is derived.
Yes.
There's a difference between intuition and empiricism. There's a lot of overlap, and I would argue that there's more than people initially propose, but there's differences there. And in a knowledge structure, we've created definitions for those. And so not only are we talking about epistemic knowing, but we're using epistemologies to describe epistemologies. So there's so many layers of experience that are going on here. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, and just in terms of being able to analyze something that you're looking into a dark room.
Right. Well, I know I bring him up a lot, but I think John Vervaeke has a really good point where it doesn't seem to be something that you can just nail down. It's something that you shift in and out. So I can't remember if he uses the same example, but if you're working on a painting, if you were to zoom in all the time to work on details, which would be maximizing things, the problem is you wouldn't ever step out to actually see how the painting's coming together. That's analyzing. But if you're only stepping out and looking at the big picture, you're never actually getting in to look at the details of the painting, of what's going on. So not to start delving into what's lacking or what the problems are just yet, but that's where you start to realize we're kind of in a culture of maximizing rather than optimizing. And knowledge, one can maximize knowledge, one can maximize experience, but it's an optimization, I would argue, both, that gives us wisdom. But in our society, I would say with the Enlightenment, and I can be corrected and wrong in this, that was a maximization of knowledge.
Yes, very much so.
And therefore it lacked a lot of the experiential side, which gave us wisdom. Today, we're more of maximizing experience and lacking in a lot of knowledge to even those things out. Again, not to start going too far into that, but I think that really helps us understand, okay, so wisdom is kind of a delicate balance in some ways, because again, it's about optimizing rather than maximizing. But again, if I had wisdom on to take a Buddhist principle, for example, I think The Hobbit is a great book, and I think it's very helpful. I even have a book on Jungian analysis for The Hobbit.
What?
With the hero's journey. But I don't think that story's going to work for everybody.
Right.
And therefore I shouldn't assume that wisdom is going to apply to everybody. There may be a chance at people's life that it could apply, but it doesn't mean all of them are going to. Maybe some people would rather prefer to have like King Arthur and his knights, or Greek mythology or Norse stories, stuff like that, or biblical stories. I think it really just depends on where you're pulling that from.
And that's why I continuously say, and I sound like a broken record, that it's grounded. It's grounded within that context from which the wisdom is derived. You can't bring it out. Like, you can't abstract it into hyper and meta-analysis to compare different cultures and mediums and frames, because it is within the frame itself.
Yes.
And it's bound to that, which I don't think is a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of contemporary psyches initially twinge when they hear that, when it's bound to, because we have this aspiration to be limitless. We have this aspiration to be boundless. When that creates transience.
Yeah. Well, it's sad you didn't watch that podcast, because that would really explain a lot of the issues for you, but we can delve into that later. But I agree with you. It's amazing how much I've taken this term, even though I didn't like it when it was used against me, and you're alluding to this. I'm sorry, I know I'm priming a lot, but it's amazing how airy mythology is. And yet, and narratives and stories, and yet there seems to be something, God, I'm gonna go Plato here. And I feel a little disgusted doing this, but there's something about them that feels more real than what we experience day to day. Now, I can actually break that down. I don't have to leave it at that as a Baptist church or a charismatic church would in the pulpit, just being like, see, there's more real than real out there, and then just leave it for you to hang like, like there's nothing substantial here for me to there's nothing for me to sit at the table and actually get something out of the banquet, right? And I can actually define that, or at least delve into that, which would be, let's take since it's right at the forefront of my brain, your Substack, which is this idea of, that's a narrative.
Right.
This idea of someone from a Navajo, right, tribe, as a girl, going through this ritual of, okay, this is the beginning stage. It doesn't make you a woman, but this is the beginning stage to bring you into womanhood, is a great example of, okay, well, you could easily take that and turn that into a story. And you'd get something like Perseus and the hero's journey, or Hercules, right? That's not airy.
No.
Because for over 100 years, this has been being practiced over and over and over. And it's gained, to use post-structuralism, so much influence, so much force, so much power behind it, that it actually has sway over something, which gives it meaning, which you would think for a culture that is all obsessed with finding meaning and making personal meaning, it would want to find that. But it seems, well, that would be getting into what's wrong. But yeah, I think that's a great way to lay it out and make it more grounded, as you had said, is the fact that it's been happening over and over and over again. And as Joseph Campbell would say, you are participating in the narrative.
that's the cyclical aspect of this. And talking about Kinalda, which is the ritual that you're referencing with the Substack that I wrote on the ritual, within that ritual there's an interesting thing that goes on, I think, that's worthwhile in highlighting here. Is this girl is becoming a woman through her first stages of menarche, and that is the initiation of the initiation. Like that's the beginning of the ritual, and so that tells people that this will happen. And within this ritual there's a particular thing that happens once that child has gone through the liminal of fast and challenge and task. They come back to this lodge where the this mystic quality of the ritual takes place, and the women that have come before this girl recreate experientially a myth. It's this drama, it's this play, but it's not fake. Like when I say drama, I don't mean, oh, they're playing parts. No, this is, when I say grounded, I really mean this is what's going on, and trying to analyze it within a secular sense completely takes the mystic quality out of it. And so what happens within this part of this ritual is, as the myth goes, the pre-human beings of the Navajo mythology, first peoples, you could say, molded the deity of changing woman kind of out of clay. They built her form, building the divine feminine. And so with this drama going on in this rite, the women that have come before this girl place hands on the girl in terms of molding her, kind of gently giving her form, kind of a warm embrace of her becoming a woman. And in that moment, there is this numinous synchronicity, and she is endowed with the power and dignity of the deity changing woman. And so with that taking place, I once again urge readers heavily not to tear this apart as a archetypal synchronistic experience, because that completely derives it of any meaning. And the mystery in it of itself is that there is an incarnation of changing woman that takes place within the specificity of a ritual and the drama that plays out, which is a reoccurring, going back, long story long, going back to what you were saying about Joseph Campbell. It's a reoccurring of an event, and you are a participant in that event, and you have always been a participant in that event. And so time suddenly is not linear, but as Mircea Eliade would say, it's cyclical, and what I would add to it's in a spiral.
Yeah. Well, I think you're being harsh on archetypes and synchronicity, because in some ways that is Joseph Campbell's thing, is archetypes. So
Well, and I say without trying to, I give that preface specifically because the first thing that the Western mind wants to do is discredit it for being such and such and such. And I urge listeners, I urge everyone to see it as much as we can as a Navajo individual would, which is in its Gestalt manner.
Right, which we would call an archetype. Or a ritual.
Right. Yeah, I think the rite and the ritual gives a secular framework to hold the mystery in.
Right.
It's a good container.
Yeah. Well, and isn't it interesting, I keep flirting with the what it isn't or why it's lacking.
We're priming our listeners very well.
Isn't it interesting that we always want to tear it apart to say, no, I don't want to live in a box, but then we immediately go out to find answers to put us in a box.
Yeah.
Or to create a box and then say, here's the box that everyone must agree to. But tear down boxes. It's a very interesting idea. But when you were talking about that, it made me think of you were saying it's not just completely mystical and let's use the word ethereal.
Yeah.
And that's because the thing we're struggling with is it's not an enlightenment thing that we can turn into a rational equation and come out with a system that will give us the answer the same every time. But neither is it fully just ethereal to where it can't even be participated in or replicated. Right. This is why I think psychology is so fascinating, is we could, and it's probably been done, we could look at the girls who have participated in this ritual and see, is there any brain chemistry that changes? Yes. Okay. Since this is inductive, by how much? How often? How often does the ritual work in this setting? Why is that a bad thing?
Right. And, if you're looking at referencing back the epistemic matrix that we initially were talking about, this ritual is within the right bottom box, being inductive and apostora,
after the fact,
dependent on experience and inductive in nature. And so it requires somebody to that's what's beautiful about this conversation, is we're talking about something that requires experience of the thing that we're talking about. And so what we're really doing is we're flirting with it, but you can't actually see what we're talking about, nor can we, unless it's actually experienced. And that is the beautiful security and mystery behind wisdom in and of itself. It can be talked about for ages but it's not known, going back to epistemic knowing, it's not known in the experiential inductive sense until it is experienced. That's the apostori quality that I'm trying to get at within this model.
Yeah. Well, I was about to make the joke that you could talk about it way past to when the cows come home.
Right.
At that point, it'd probably be redundant. But yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. What I find interesting about that is it's amazing how much experience is crucial. But because of how much we championed the knowledge side during the Enlightenment, and we believe the Enlightenment is to blame for the tragedies of the 20th century, that we decided we should be more rational,
right,
ironically, about it. And instead of deciding to take the rational approach, which would have been, let's be more nuanced, let's look at things in their holistic manner while also being able to analyze, jump in and out at the same time, so optimizing rather than maximizing, we instead decided to maximize experience.
Yeah, and we haven't put out this epistemic model, and so yet in terms of a research and clinical setting, and so listeners here are kind of getting a very kind of the first public face of this. But what we plan to do is put this we have a joining survey that asks people how much they use different epistemologies, and from those scores we grab meta scores based upon the epistemologies that correlate to different categories. And so what we do is we're going to build this out and then get as many people within a university context to take it, see where they map. And I'm interested in the university setting specifically, and we're going to name drop him again. John Vervaeke does this really beautifully, and you've told me this, so you're my source. But that,
oh, great.
John Vervaeke will ask people where they get information.
Mm-hmm.
People will say internet, media, blah, blah. He'll ask his students where they get knowledge, and they'll usually reference universities, college, and they ask them where they get their wisdom, and it's usually dead quiet.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking to highlight that within the context of this epistemic matrix. But I want to preface, too, that the few people I've had take this that sit within the same context that I do, some of them sit on a more experiential level. And so, to your point, wisdom is not found in the experience alone, but the balance of wisdom, experience, and the knowledge derived from the experience.
Right. Yeah, well, and we should probably be more specific. We're not saying when you experience something that you have to go and read a book.
No.
It'd be good if you did that. But it can also be as simply as logic,
Mm-hmm.
as you'd already said, giving you a book on logic. So you've already read The Hobbit. Okay, now read the book on logic.
Right.
And not everything's going to overlap. That's okay. It doesn't need to. It's when you realize in a world where we're trying to get rid of absolutes, we're still trying to find absolutes. Because I could have an experience, let's say riding a bike, and I do something I've never done before and it works. And I wish to replicate that. Okay, well, I'd want to think about what did I do? And then I want to test that over and over again to see how I could replicate it. That's one way. That's getting knowledge along with your experience. You could also just go read a book or an article and see if someone has done this before, and then figure out what has been done in that sense to make it
Mm-hmm.
more replicable, and then try that, and you're doing the same thing as before, but now you have an exterior source to ground it more than just your personal experience to be able to gain some wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about people in positions of leadership, which might kind of highlight why we have so many problematic leaders, is we have people that are going in trying to enforce their specific experience of it and their knowledge built up of it, instead of trying to figure out how that knowledge works outside that fear to be more well-rounded
Right.
and therefore more wise about it.
Yeah, and the mystery behind wisdom continues when you realize that experience can happen and wisdom can be left underived. It takes the pursuit of knowledge embedded within that experience that causes the wisdom to come forward. I see this a lot within trauma. In the clinical setting, people will go through an experience that is incredibly traumatic, and if there's no analysis of the information that was processed within that traumatic experience, and that information turning into some narrative that we would derive or categorize as knowledge embedded within the experience of that trauma, that experience just remains pure experience. And
Yeah.
so by no means am I saying that go and just purely experience things and wisdom will come. But if you go and experience things and then you take the step of integrating that experience with knowledge that you previously know or you are going to know, this is why hindsight, people that are older typically have a lot of wisdom we would associate culturally because they've gone through it and they've had the time to analyze what they've gone through.
Yeah. Well, not all of them.
Right.
That's where we would be distinguishing hindsight bias between actual wisdom, is those who are just biased to their own experience, which mean they would just be enforcing this is what's going to happen. Trust me, it happened to me. Is like, well, it doesn't mean it's going to happen the exact same way.
Right.
So there's some bias there compared to, okay, well, my hindsight and everything I've looked at and hearing multiple perspectives on it, this is what I have found. But the other thing that's interesting, and I don't know if this throws off your matrix at all, is wisdom kind of is an authority figure.
Yes.
Because you can question it, you can tamper with it of like, okay, it's not exactly going to be the way that it was described to me, but it's not exactly something that you can just completely dismiss.
Of course, yes. Yeah, and that's why I stress so much elderhood, because there's when I say authority, I think there's this first world annoyance around the word because we think of it as temperance of individuality, but I think that
because it's authority,
right. But in a stepping outside of our context, I think that authority such as eldership, mentorship, there's authority in those figures that informs your experience based upon their experience, based upon their derived wisdom. That's why I place so much weight on the importance of elderhood, because I think through the authority in and of itself, you derive as much cultural wisdom as you can. There's elders in every ritual.
Yeah.
Because there's those who have gone through the ritual.
Right. We just run into one tiny debacle, which is, how do you gain the wisdom to tell which individuals that are elders are wise and which ones are fools?
I think it's a question of cultural specificity.
Okay, what do you mean?
The wisdom in and of itself is embedded within that context. And so while wisdom is a observation of the multiplicity of perspective, it is also an observation of the specified derivative of knowledge within said experience. And so drawing back onto what you've said with hindsight bias, sure, there is hindsight bias, and I think that's inevitable within anybody, because they're deriving knowledge based upon prior experience, rationalizing information from what they've gone through. And so that in and of itself is a level of hindsight bias. And I think something that the Western world likes to throw onto eldership far too often is the fools over the wise. And I think that it's something that works itself out because you have this higher authority of the ritual itself. And so if there's not elderhood is not adhered to the cultural ritual, then they're fools.
Sure. I guess we could do you want to use a specific example? Like, here, I can give you one. So
sure.
More like, I'll throw it at you, and then you
sure.
can kind of like take it apart and explain more what you mean. So in Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle talks about the difference between someone who is virtuous and what we would now call virtue signaling. And he calls, so for instance, the example he gives is a drunk running into town, and they're telling people, don't drink, while he's plastered. And that, all the things of why it's bad for you. So the questions I then have to kind of try and hone in on what you're talking about is there still wisdom within the information he's given, or is it just information and knowledge? Or, in other words, I guess to be more specific, is there still wisdom in the claims from the drunkard, don't drink? Because we know already he's a fool. Or is it just good information, like good knowledge?
Honestly, I would say there's more wisdom in his perspective than if a priest that's never taken a sip of alcohol in his life comes and tells you not to drink. Because that knowledge is embedded within an experience, and I'm making broad strokes on the experience of these two individuals that I'm posing hypothetically. But if you think of, and I love that you brought this up, because one of the only places that I've seen that wisdom embedded within a contemporary context is sobriety cultures, AA, and the drunkard saying don't drink, because they've been torn apart from their struggle, the thorn in their side. And so I would say there's more wisdom in the drunkard than the sober man.
So now we should be more specific to his example. It's someone who loves being drunk, who's going around telling people, don't drink. These are why this is advice.
Then that would just be a fool.
Okay. But is there still wisdom into what he's saying, or is it just good knowledge?
And you say that he likes to drink.
Yes. He is a drunk. It is his vice, and yet he's telling other people, don't do this vice.
Yeah, I would say there is. Based upon if I'm just reading a book from some author I have no idea of his experience or his background, and he just says, don't drink, versus a drunk coming and telling me don't drink, even though he loves it. I would have to agree that I would have to preface that there's more experiential embedded information within the context of the drunkard than there is in a abstracted informational knowledge. And I'm comparative, and I think maybe that's kind of missing the point here.
Yeah.
But, what makes a fool versus a wise man within this context, I really think is dependent upon the metastructure from which those elders, those wise individuals sit within. You think, and a great example of this is Christianity, and very ancient Orthodox Christianity, because there within the Orthodox Church there is the tradition of holy fools. Okay, so they're very on the outskirts individuals who live in poverty, who do outrageous things. There's a tale of a holy fool who would act drunk. He would walk around acting drunk, and he would be drinking quote unquote, hard liquor. But one within the story that I'm referencing here, a boy comes up to this holy fool and says, "Sir, why are you drinking?" And then he makes the boy drink what he's drinking, and it's water. And so he's like on the outskirts. He's very eccentric. But within the context of Christ's doctrine and the biblical context, they're wise, because they highlight through their absurdity qualities that are missed within social structure. And so I would say that once again, talking about the grounded nature of wisdom, it's dependent upon the cultural context from which the wisdom or knowledge is derived.
Right.
Long-winded.
No, that's okay. I wouldn't disagree, and that's why so many people came up with the gag of for that part for Aristotle is a lute player if he's no longer playing a lute.
Right.
It's kind of a little ridiculous, but I think what more of Aristotle is getting at is, again, it's what we call virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
The intent is to appear virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
Like the post-structuralist argument would be, well, okay, is it bad to drink? Or is it just because we say it is? Now let's delve even further, because that's way too abstract. Does each generation say it's bad to drink because they know it's bad to drink, or it's because it's what they've been told and they just repeat it? Because as you said, they have no experience of the drinking to actually know why being a drunkard and creating it as your vice or making it your primary vice is bad. So do they actually know, or are they just puppeting the same thing? To which then, for post-structuralism, that would say that there is a force, a power behind that narrative.
Yeah, I would say that's the power, the authoritative power of generational wisdom, is that and that's the purpose and lost quality, not touching on what's lost and where it's lost yet, but that's the lost quality, that it's of rituals and rites. There's a way to experience why being a drunkard is bad without having to be a drunkard, because the ritual and the drama and the narrative are structured in a way that without having to lose yourself.
Right. Well, and there's this, other than The Return of the Strong Gods, I had read this art book called Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. And he was quoting another artist that was saying, everything has been said before. Some things just need to be reminded of.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I'm bringing that up with what you just said is, okay, we can have all this information that tells us as generational knowledge and wisdom, drinking as a vice is bad.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a society that is, as much as it's built on being anti-utopian, is very utopian.
Yeah.
Because there's a desire to make it to where no one has vice, that it's only the good things. But of course, we don't want to actually define vice or define virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Based off of that quote, which I think is a good outlook.
Oh, yeah.
We would actually need people who are drunks to remind us, that's, as you said, that's why our previous generations have told us, don't let drinking be a vice, because of that. Like, I don't have to experience it to apply the knowledge of why I shouldn't do that.
and what is myth? What is drama associated with myth, and what is the experiential application of said myth and drama, which is ritual? In that, I think it's the the historical and archaic way of implementing such experiential qualities. I call it a wisdom machine.
Okay.
Like a ritual is a wisdom machine.
Yeah.
You derive experiential knowledge through a means that you don't have to die, you don't have to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. All these tenets that have been learned truly experientially through time get encoded into a story, which gets encoded into an experiential ritual that is encoded onto an individual.
Right. Jeez, man. Now you're just building what did Kant call it? He has a whole machine, like a conduit of how things work. I don't think that's bad. I can kind of understand why people don't like Kant. But anyway, I digress. What I think is interesting about the machine idea is we go into dangerous territory of the Enlightenment where we're making it an equation.
Yes, definitely.
But the good thing of it, I should say, before I continue, is it is a machine because it's a ritual. It's a repeated process, just like a computer would have to run a program.
Algorithmic.
Yeah. But every single girl that goes through that ritual is not going to come out the same.
Right.
So, for instance, what I think is brilliant about the analogy of it being machine is, well, so which part of the machine are we on? Oh, right. We're just at the beginning of it. We haven't come out all the way out onto the other side. And you could argue, as much as I agree with Ian McGilchrist that how much we tend to just make everything mechanistic in our culture is a problem, we do just kind of just jump from one machine to the next machine to the next machine for each stage of life. The reason why I think the machine analogy falls short is, well, it isn't a machine where you're just going through a conduit coming out the other end. It's a little more nuanced and complicated than that. But I like the metaphor because it does show that, okay, well, this girl is going through this, but when she comes home and they welcome her, she hasn't gotten full wisdom. She's on the path of wisdom because as soon as she starts asking her mom, what was it like for you? What about grandma? What did grandma say? What did grandma say? If that is remembered, which of course it's going to kind of be like the telephone game in my humble opinion, where it's not going to be exactly what was said. It's going to be a paraphrase.
In a good way, I think, in some way.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's bad. I'm not placing any value judgment on it at all. I'm just going to take it as it is. That's where more wisdom starts being accumulated. And then talking to the next of kin, of passing that on, learning something from that. Again, it's why I think mythos is so good, and just the story of it is so good, because you can go back to Star Wars when you're 70 and it has so many good things to pull from. You can go back to Perseus and Medusa and still get tons of great things to come from, just to pull out of it for your life. That's a good thing. That means there's a continuous source of something to pull out of that.
The well doesn't dry up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and one thing to specify about rituals, and specifically rite of passage rituals, is that within most culturally specified rite of passage rituals, there is a period of isolation of that individual after they've gone through the rite. And so with Canalda, she's left alone after she's gone through the ritual for a few days to process. And so that would be the acquisition of wisdom that comes out of the ritual. So that's the semi-final stage of the machine, quote unquote. And I would say that machine is continual because nowhere in the literature about rituals, and nowhere in the experiential quality of rituals, does it say that after the ritual is done, they're new? They're changed, but they're integrated into a different category of the social structure, which enables them to grow into the ideal of that social structure. And so the Kinalda, the girl who has gone through this ritual, is now a woman. Within the culture, there's specified contents of what it means to be a woman. She is not all of those contents, but she's placed in a new pot to grow into that, if that's kind of a proper metaphor for it. And so one takes on companionship with elders and mentors once they've gone through the process, and continues to learn from scaffolding of social structure to grow into what she's been initiated toward.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, I can't hold off anymore, so we're gonna have to delve into.
So this is what is wrong.
No. I want to be analytical now, and then we'll probably switch over to the why there's. It's still gonna encompass why there's a lack of it, but. The thing that's interesting about Kinalda and going through that is it's very structured.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, we said it again. And it's meant to make sure that, okay, it's very perennialist, if you remember what that is.
Yeah.
In a way, because it's saying this is what has helped us survive. This is what has been required of both our women and our men in the population in order for this group to survive. As much as I think, and I think John Vervaeke's a great example of this. Gosh, take a drink every single time I say the guy's name.
Yeah.
We can't go back to that.
No.
I think that's one thing that really bothers me about religious communities. As someone who can be considered religious, is there's this mentality that we can just go back.
Right.
And it will solve the problem. And it's like, but we're no longer in this perennial mindset anymore. And because we've tasted the fruit,
Mm-hmm.
we already know what it tastes like. We can't go back to what it, not having tasted it before.
Right.
So we can't just abandon everything we've developed to go back to perennialism and then sit there and go, yep, hands clean, don't have to worry about it anymore. You also have the problem where, because it creates such a perennial structure of this is what women are to do, this is what men are supposed to do, you can kind of understand why we've gotten to where we are. Is, well, what if a generation does not uphold what is needed for the women or the men to do for that? Or let's go the Jungian route with the anima and the animus, which we brought up last time, which is, what if you have a man that's more feminine, who would be better likely to fill the role of what a woman would do, or you have a woman who's more masculine, animus, and would be better to fill what is needed in the masculine role to do. Now, what's interesting is there are some tribes that have terms for that.
Yes.
To say, yep, you were born a woman, but this is the role that you have been moved into due to your temperament, so to speak, or vice versa. But now that I'm thinking about this, I'm now creating a whole other problem, which is I just placed everything in boxes. And our culture is very, very worried about the outcomes of where those boxes lead, which is authoritarianism, totalitarianism, is what it's worried about. The thing that would be interesting is, do these tribes even think about that? Do they think about it as in boxes for categories to have to be pigeonholed and forced into? Or are they thinking of it based more on what is needed for the survival of the tribe? Now, of course, I can't make the generalized statement when we say they think about what is the betterment for the tribe.
Right.
As in, no, there aren't men in a group who aren't ostracized, to use the Greek term, for not fulfilling the male role, or women who are not ostracized for fulfilling the female role, the feminine role. But again, it doesn't explain for the West, though, that because we've noticed the boxes, we've categorized the boxes, which would, by a post-structuralist argument, would mean we're the one who keeps giving power and force to this narrative. The boxes didn't exist. We placed the boxes there. Wow, that is in and of itself a post-structuralist argument. And yet, we constantly want to reinforce that there are boxes there and that the boxes should be broken. And when we break the box, we make a new box.
Yeah.
It just really confuses me, because it's where you realize, oh, have we gotten to a point in the West where ritual would be difficult to implement because we would immediately want to create a box out of it? We would then immediately start analyzing why the box doesn't work and then want to break the box.
So it's why I initially was so harsh on archetypal analysis.
Okay.
That's why. Because I know what my Western mind wants to do, which is put it in a box and then break the box and say, look, it was a box. And this gets into another another quality of what we're talking about here, with wisdom, with ritual, that you're gonna have to help me on.
Okay.
Because it's something that I've chosen to leave undefined and mystical in my perception, that the archaic man does not consider it a box, but considers it a honor, because said rituals, said cultural identities, said boxes, quote unquote, are spirited. They're full of potential for that individual, their honor, their means of respect, their, and I would pose this as a correlational analysis to increased levels of social identity, that the person who lives within a tribal social structure has, that the postmodern man does not, because that is not where his sights are set.
Yeah.
There's a lot of blank spaces and a lot of missing words in that analysis, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
My honest opinion is I think it should remain that way.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know how else to explain that other than why we have a lack.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and delve into that. I am in agreement with several of the individuals I've been studying recently that what we are currently living in what is called the post-war consensus. It is influenced and founded on what we call the Open Society. That is Karl Popper and his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, and Friedrich Hayek, The Road to Serfdom, which is also about what led to totalitarianism, so Nazism, communism, fascism, and the tragedies of World War I and World War II. And Popper's idea is that it's dogmatism of all kinds that has led to the tragedy of the 20th century. So truth is a dogma. It's a strong God. It's something that we passionately follow with loyalty. Now, going back to Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, we can understand why what we call the left in the U.S. does not really care for loyalty, because they see it as a potential threat to bring back authoritarianism, totalitarianism. Popper's whole theory is about breaking down walls, breaking down borders, because border structures are all capable to be dogmatically followed and lead us to totalitarian, authoritarian tendencies. You then get people, for instance, after World War II, the Harvard Institute, which is kind of shocking for people on both the left and the right to hear this. The Harvard Institute, after World War II, decided, okay, we're going to jump on board, consciously or unconsciously, with the post-war consensus of this open society, and we're going to maintain tradition, but experiment. I mean, the tradition is not going to be upheld dogmatically as the case, the fact, as the a priori truth. It's going to be experimented with. It's going to be able to be questioned. So we need to prioritize and maintain tradition, but need to be able to experiment. You have a lot of people like Schlesinger and them who believe that being is not okay. So truth should be substituted for meaning. It's all about my personal meaning. Universal truths should be replaced with experience. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Very much sounds like our culture. So in other words, the open society, the byproducts purposely destroy ritual, purposely destroy structures, especially when you get to the point that we have to pick on the left, where they see anything that has a structure as a threat to the open society. What's interesting is that they've chosen the strong gods of vengeance and justice, which is in opposition to the open society. So one of my classmates, as you've heard, who's a big socialist, very, very passionate about it. Well, according to Popper, who's the one that created the paradox of tolerance, that is anti-open society because it's a threat to it. In other words, you can break down our current culture as we must always accept difference. We should never settle for structure. Hence our previous conversations of this anti-structuralist mentality, yet somehow it's become very structuralist.
Yeah.
So by understanding that, and I'm not sure if I butchered it or if it's added any insight or not, hopefully it has, it really sure did for me, you can kind of understand, oh, it's not about finding shared meaning. It's about finding individual meaning. Mm-hmm. It's not about finding common ground or what unifies us. It's all about accepting differences. In other words, we've gone from one extreme, which is only focusing on similarities, so the tragedies of the 20th century, to swap into the other of we should only accept differences and that will bring about our utopia. That's a huge problem because sociology and social psychology all show that you don't get people to accept each other based off of differences.
Right.
You get them to accept each other based off of similarities that they can empathize with.
Yeah.
If that's false, first of all, you have to argue with the evidence, which has been replicated. And you also have to argue with, strangely enough, anecdotal evidence for everybody, which is how do you make friends? You don't make friends based off of differences. You make friends based off of similarities. You don't build relationships, romantic relationships, based off of differences. You build them off of similarities. But we're constantly focused on differences. If you're always focused on difference, where do you find wisdom? Wisdom is about shared things. For instance, ritual, as we've just discussed. If it's only about differences, you can't build a ritual, because remember, a ritual is structure,
right,
which can become authoritarian. That is weird to me, because we prioritize and champion all these indigenous populations and these tribes that still hold to the archaic way of life, as you said, to use Mircea Eliada's terms, but we demonize any of it within our culture. Now that creates an interesting paradox for the left, which is, how can you claim that us creating structure and rituals is a threat to bring back authoritarianism and totalitarianism, but bringing other structures into the culture is not a danger of authoritarianism and totalitarianism's return? That is a little contradictory and mind-blowing to me. I think Islam, as someone who I'm not fully studied in the Islamic theology and faith. But I mean, who's fully studied in Christian theology?
Right.
There's so many different schools of thought, just as there's so many different schools of thought, although there's two primary schools in Islam. I think that's a great example right now where it's like, okay, well, this is a very dogmatic faith. We're being told we must champion it because it's anti-Western. But it shares all the same, to use, I can't remember if it was Princeton or Yale or Harvard's, the authoritarian personality study. It carries all of the authoritarian, totalitarian personality traits. So why is it not being seen as a threat to bring back totalitarianism and authoritarianism compared to something else? But the argument that Reno's making in The Return for the Strong Gods is, why did all strong gods have to go? Why did ritual have to go? Can't we prioritize the ones that are good? So for instance, even if you're not a Christian, you can find it in many different religions and philosophies. To take you will know them by their fruits. If we find a ritual that is constantly producing good fruit, which I think is a great analogy, because it means that every single individual that goes to the ritual is not going to be good fruit. There's going to be rotten fruit or bad fruit among them. Why is that bad? Like, this is where I think post-structuralism is genius, because, as we said before, let me give a good example. I know I've talked about post-structuralism quite a bit, but I'm getting to learn more and more ways to better describe it, and I'm learning so much more about it. They are trying to say that, again, I've said this before, to paraphrase Foucault's very good quote, power isn't everything, but it is everywhere. I think it's a brilliant quote. Let's look at Christendom. So the medieval times. Christianity is supposed to be a religion of spreading Christ's love and salvation. And eventually, with Charlemagne and others, it's now taking and spreading the faith by the sword. I had an individual a few weeks ago ask me a question. He goes, my problem with religion is it's just a means of control. Now, it's not a question, but he was stating it as an, okay,
what are you going to do with that?
What are you going to do with that? And I said, I would disagree. One of the brilliant things about religion is it already creates a sense of community. Even if you don't believe in the religion, you understand how the community works and how to function in it. It immediately creates a home for everybody to live in. The problem is, the more narratives and things that are built behind it, the more force it has to it, the more power it accumulates. And all it takes is for people to come in and then use that power that is generated over time for the wrong things. Mm-hmm. That has some very interesting questions behind it, which is, okay, is it the church then that's the problem? Is it the narratives? Or is it the individuals that came in and abused the power? Well, that's difficult, because if we were to structure it, you'd put the church at the top, and you'd just create two boxes of the individuals and the narrative to the left, the individuals to the right. Well, obviously we'd have to agree the narratives are to blame, because there was nothing keeping it in check to maintain the purpose of the ritual, the point of the narratives. I'm not an expert, and that's kind of a product of our open society as technocrats and experts. But if you kept the narrative in place, you'd have a lot easier time spotting people who were trying to come in and abuse the system.
Like knows like.
Yeah. Or in the sense of, this is what the narrative is for, this is what the right is for, someone is now coming in and saying it's actually for this. No, I don't think so. I think game theory is brilliant,
Yes.
as oversimplified as it can be. Is, in other words, if you have a society, let's say 3 individuals first, that are all playing the cooperate card, and it makes them a lot stronger than individuals that are defectors.
Mm-hmm.
All it takes is, and then that society starts getting bigger. Well, eventually the defectors are going to realize, man, being out here by myself isn't going to work for my survival like it did before. I'm now going to have to integrate myself into this society. Okay, well, now there's a huge amount of force and power, consciously and unconsciously, behind that major force of cooperators. But because they only cooperate, defectors that claim to follow the system and live within the group can benefit a lot. And a lot of the algorithms have been being done since the 70s, as Richard Dawkins shows in The Selfish Gene. What eventually happens is the defectors destroy the cooperators. And the reason why is because the cooperators will never learn from their mistake of how to deal with a defector. The issue is, if the defectors dominate, the society doesn't function anymore. Right. But the best way for a defector to operate within the society is using the society against itself, the thing that makes it function. It turns out, as a side note, the best game is to be a tit for tatter, being able to know when to cooperate and when to defect.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Breaking the rules when it's necessary.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. So my whole point of that is, we can see, based off of game theory, okay, well, a whole group of people creates a lot of force, because again, it can just take out individual defectors easily, but it can't seem to really defend itself from the inside when defectors are using its narrative against itself. Okay, yeah, the post-structuralists are then correct in that sense, that narratives do have power behind them, which I think you and I would agree, based off of the importance of rituals. I think where it falls short is, okay, well, then that would mean there is an obligation of loyalty and respect to these narratives, these rituals, to make sure that they are being nurtured and maintained so they continue to be beneficial. I just don't know any society that's ever been able to do that. But again, to our point previously about the whole everything has been said before, some things just need to be reminded of. Why is that a bad thing? So if maintaining it and nurturing it isn't going to work to remind you why it's important, why wouldn't it being used the wrong way for the detriment of the group be a good reminder of why it should work the way it was before? Now, of course, one could even argue, I don't want to be dogmatic here, even though that's playing into the open society mentality. I don't want to sit here and say, okay, but it's not just because of the fact that they weren't doing it the way it was before. This is where I like conservatism to many degrees, at least this specific aspect of conservatism, which is because things do change over time. Technology changes people, the way people interact, and the knowledge we get changes people. In other words, as Miller has said, I guarantee the idea of forms with Plato had always been around, but no one thought of it the way Plato did.
Mm-hmm.
The idea and how things and structure that Kant thought, well, we see people around us all the time that are that dogmatic about structure and how the world works, that everything's a machine and very meticulous in how it should be, but no one thought about it to the extent that Kant did, and then put it out into the world,
right,
to
influence
the world.
articulate it.
Yes, exactly. So that means you take the good, you leave the bad, or sometimes it needs restoration, or it needs changing. Why is that a bad thing?
Well, and how do you tend to a rose bush?
Yeah.
You prune.
Yeah.
And that's not to be insensitive in any regard, but saying that it's a pragmatic way of dealing with growth that will cause death to the larger structure.
Right.
And that I want to preface that idea can be very dangerous if in the wrong hands.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing, though, to take this idea with your example, It's amazing how much conservatives, which is why I really question if there's really such a thing as conservatives. Right. It's, again, as Roger Scruton said, there are very few intellectual conservatives, which you kind of have to be an intellectual to be a conservative. They're always, personality-wise, as you and I know from psychology, mainly tagged with reluctant to change, or a reluctance to change. Okay. That view would be like pruning every day the same parts of the rose bush every day. Okay, maybe not that extreme. Every week, every month, once every week, once every month, whatever your pick, but picking the same ones every time. You're not actually looking around to see which part of the rose bush needs it. You're just going to the same ones every single time. It goes again back to Kierkegaard on the difference between a copycat and a master. A copycat will have someone show them, okay, this is how you prune, and they'll be like, okay, they cut those, I took meticulous notes, they cut those ones, and then they come back and they cut all those exact same ones. A master, on the other hand, is going to look at that bush and go, they were actually trying to show the importance of, this is what you need to look for, this is why it's important that this gets pruned and why it's healthy for the rose bush. I'm not looking at the particular ones they cut to replicate. I'm looking to find those anywhere that is needed to remove or prune from the rose bush.
Well, and I want to preface again your use of game theory being the ability to be both a defector and a what was the other term?
Cooperator.
A cooperator. And that is a brilliant and very, very edifying example of the trickster archetype.
Yes.
That's Loki.
Yep.
He resides within the structure and the mythos of Norse mythology.
Yes.
But he shows where the hell we've gone wrong.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with the idea of it, I said Harry Potter earlier because contemporarily that is a great example of the trickster archetype. The individual who learns the rules and masters them to such a degree that they're able to break the ones that aren't working.
Yes.
And that is the pruning. And
right.
Connecting even further, that is the holy fools.
Yeah.
We see individuals that aren't operating as a typical priest or typical monk may, but they're still operating within the intention of the structure, but not the application of the structure.
Yeah. Well, and let's delve into the archetype even further because I think this helps, which is Harry Potter himself has no home.
Right.
He's not a member of the community. His community is Hermione and Ron. That's primarily it. Oh, and Hagrid. Maybe Dumbledore. But that kind of gets flipped on its head at the end. He's not sure. Why is that important? He has no community to ground himself in. So he's always able to look at what it is the community says it's for and then be able to break the rules when necessary because the community actually isn't upholding what it says it's for because the rules are in opposition to that. And because he breaks the rules, he can show that the structure actually doesn't work the way that it says it's intended to work, which means they're able to adapt to it. So it's for the betterment of the community. To your point, the biggest problem I would argue with our society is that it's everyone wanting to be a Loki trickster archetype to fix the problem. The problem with that is it's amazing how much we have the buzzword community in the West, especially here in the US. You can't build a community of Lokis.
No.
What makes Harry Potter and his friends' relationships work is because they're not around each other all the time. When school's over, they separate.
Right.
And then they get back together. But what also makes them work, and it's interesting thinking about this, sorry, I'm having a few insights popping off here, is Hermione is also an outcast.
Yeah.
Ron, not really. Kind of. But I would argue out of the three of them, he's the least outcast. He has a family of several siblings that are kind of a trickster archetype, but he's in a community with a past to build from. Why is Loki important? he's taken from his home at childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
He has no community he was born into. He has an adopted community he's born into, but he has no roots in that community. Harry is born and stripped away from his parents because of their death and placed with his in-laws,
Mm-hmm.
or his family's in-laws. He has no roots. Hermione's outcast is that her family's always been kind of looked at as, yeah, this is the ones that keep to themselves, are really super snooty and super smart. Ron's is, oh yeah, they always have a lot of kids. They tend to be weird. But that's the only outcast he has. It's not the same. He's not pulled from his roots like Harry and Hermione is my point. So he's not a full trickster. It's why those three work, though. Ron is a trickster built within having roots and a family. So he's kind of a connection between those two. You have like a full degree of Harry's the most trickster, Hermione, Ron, and then that is able to move back into the community.
Within that triad, the entirety of the trickster archetype is exemplified.
Yes, exactly.
And there's this contemporary mystic that I recommend anybody to listen to read, Richard Rohr. He describes the trickster archetype as being on the edge of the inside.
Yeah.
And St. Francis was a Christian interpretation of that because he resided within Catholicism, but he very diligently and very expertly maneuvered the authoritative dogmatism that the church was trying to place upon him and his right of Catholicism that he didn't want, by the way. Not only he was such a good trickster that the Catholic Church gave him structure. They gave him a classification of Catholicism. He didn't want any of that. He didn't want followers or anything, but he played within the system so well and highlighted flaws so well, people naturally flocked to him. And in a way, it's a perfect example of how this pruning process works, is because the trickster highlights the avenue that we should be going, and then the entirety of the growth, the entirety of the social body follows that, and you establish a new branch. And so the tradition succeeds in a new interpretation, successing over the prior corruption or distortion that may have been happening.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's funny, I was just about to ask you, why do they follow the trickster, though? But to highlight a few points that you kind of alluded to, which is, well, this is the guy that just exposed the system doesn't work, so there must be something he knows that works. So I'm going to follow that guy. The problem is, he doesn't have a clue either.
Right.
All he knows, as you said, is because he's on the edge of the inside, is that he's able to see from an outside, quote-unquote, perspective of why the inside doesn't work, which benefits the inside because they can adjust to that to actually make it beneficial for everybody else. What I find ironic about that is that it's actually not in the best interest of the people to follow the trickster. It's in the best interest to remain with the community, as long as the community is upholding to changing what is needed based off of the findings of the trickster.
Yes.
That's kind of the whole relationship of the archetype. But, yeah.
Well, and, I think there's a very succinct distinction between the trickster who still deems the structure good and the trickster who says to hell with it all. Because that's no longer the trickster archetype, in my opinion. That's the anarchist.
Yeah.
That's the let's burn it down, and there's nothing good here anyway, so why should we follow it at all? That has essences of trickster-like behavior, but it's not the trickster, in my opinion, because it's not on the edge of the inside, it's on the outside.
Right.
They have outcast themselves. They are full defectors now, trying to destroy the social structure in its entirety.
Yeah.
edge of the inside image works so well because on the inside you I think of an abstract circle. You move the shape, or you change the shape by changing the edge, and so on sitting on that edge you can move to, and then the shape itself accompanies that movement as long as you're inside the shape.
Yeah.
If that makes sense at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, it does, because what you're highlighting is that the trickster is not apathetic.
Yes.
Like Loki does he's not something that doesn't care about anything.
Right.
Like everything Loki does is for his self-interest.
Right.
It just happens to benefit everybody else. There's no apathy there. If there was apathy, there'd be no care for himself. There'd be no care for the community. As you said, what's the point of any of it? Who cares? So yeah, no, I completely agree. What's interesting, I want to go on a quick tangent here because it made me think about this. Where does Zarathustra from Nietzsche fit in all this? Because this is someone who realizes that society is killing itself.
Yeah.
And he leaves it to go connect with the world. It's amazing how much Nietzsche is called a nihilist when he's not.
Yeah.
But what's ironic is Nietzsche's the determinist, like almost to an extreme. Like he believes that there is things work for a reason. Like your genetics predispose you to how things are going to be for you in the future, and that it's going to be those who have very strong willpower that will rise above everybody else. So Zarathustra is someone who realizes, okay, society is dying and they're killing themselves. In other words, they created this god and now the god is dead. And instead of wanting to realize they're the ones that created the god that brought about all the dysfunction and problems in their society, they're all still acting like the death of God is going to save them. So Zarathustra leaves, gains wisdom, and then he's wanting to actually build community. But it's not really a community because he's wanting people to come and learn from his wisdom, but then send them off on their way for them to live as a community among each other.
And I would consider him a trickster.
Okay.
But, and I say that for a very specific reason, because he uses one word in that famous line that indicates it. God is dead and we killed him. He doesn't say you killed him. I'm not a part of the death. You killed him. He says we, because he's still in the body. He's still in the social structure. He comes down from the mountain and tries to edify, tries to highlight flaws. And in a weird Franciscan way, does acquire some apostleship and some followers. But to your point, I don't think it's a adjacent interpretation of it. I don't think it's the same. I think it's like we're talking about with the triad within Harry Potter, exemplifying the entirety of the trickster archetype. I think it's a specificity of one of those within that multiplicity of expressions.
Yeah, I would agree. But remember, you're not quoting Zarathustra. You're quoting the gay science.
Right.
So, yeah, but I would agree. He does fit as he's interesting as the trickster archetype because Loki is just purely for self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's in the society on the outskirts, but he's just looking for his own interest. And by pursuing his own interest, it tends to benefit the community because Loki gets to point out what's wrong with the community, but they also get to realize why he shouldn't be followed.
Right.
Whereas Zarathustra is not someone who's just pursuing things for his own interest. He has a great, deep love for man
because
and wanting
he's wise.
man to be, yeah.
Well, and what a beautiful convergence of the ideas we're talking about here, because an individual who is not... Wisdom is essential to the trickster archetype. Because if you're just full of knowledge, you have a lot of resentful apathy towards the system that you have now seen the lackings of, but you have no skin in that game, and so you're going to burn it all down.
Right. I don't know. I might disagree. I wouldn't think that wisdom is essential to it, because if we go off the classic example of Loki, Tywin Lannister, even though he's a terrible evil character in Game of Thrones, has a brilliant line when he's talking to Tammin, where he says, a wise king knows what he knows and what he doesn't. I think that is a very, very, if not the most accurate, very close to accurate idea of a wise person.
Yes.
Loki doesn't know what he knows and what he doesn't. He's just pursuing his self-interest. And what makes him fail most of the time is because he's not understanding what he doesn't know.
Well, yeah, and I say that specifically because we've talked about wisdom being culturally embedded within a structure, and it being implicit within that, and abstracting it from makes analysis hard. The trickster gains that rebellious nature, but not the anarchist nature, because they're still embedded within the narrative, within the structure. Yeah. And so that's what I'm saying when wisdom is applied, because they still have some level of application to the knowledge that they
right. So it's not really that wisdom is an essential part of the trickster, it's that the trickster is an essential part to the structure of wisdom.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a perfect way to succinct that.
Okay. Sorry, I was seeing it the other way around.
No, I said it the wrong orientation.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I think you clarified that very well.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head, which is why, to go back to the open society problem, is it creates a society of meaninglessness. Why? The Aryan race narrative was there before Nietzsche was born. It was there when he was a kid. That was a very powerful narrative that claimed it had tons of wisdom and could solve the problem for Germany. That's a dangerous narrative. The problem and why you can understand the left and even the right is so scared, and I know that might be shocking to some people to think the right is scared of totalitarianism and fascism, but they are. You can understand why they're so scared of it, because a primary key to fascism is tricksters get annihilated. We're not going to have any dissenters that can actually correct the course of our, quote, wisdom, unquote. You think about communism. I'm going to quote Marx, a social science, unquote. It's a science. It can't be argued with. It should be followed. That gave a lot of meaning. So, because so much meaning behind something can lead people to these terrible things, you think Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, communist USSR, communist China, communist North Korea. Yeah, you can kind of understand the open society's skepticism and weariness of meaning. The problem is, look at where we are. It seems that no meaning is leading us to a new totalitarianism, I would argue. But then we run into another problem. Is there wisdom in Camus? Have you read much Camus?
I've read The Stranger.
Okay.
And I know the premises of like Sisyphus and that kind of thing.
Camus' philosophy is very much in favor of the open society and the post-war consensus, because it's saying you should not place your focus of meaning into something grander. You should just struggle with the absurdity of life and develop your own meaning. Is there wisdom in such knowledge?
What's funny is that's, if you take that's a kind of a structure in and of itself.
It is. It's a structure with very little structure.
Right.
I mean, to your point, the idea of This is why his whole thing on Sisyphus is such an amazing idea, because let's say that's all you got to do with your life is just push a boulder up and down a mountain every day. Maybe you should just accept the absurdity of it and make your own meaning out of it. Because is there really any meaning to Sisyphus pushing that boulder up a hill or the mountain every day? No, it's a punishment.
And I think actually, in a very weird twist of events, that Camus' notion of finding order in the absurd, finding meaning within the absurd, is really a poignant way of talking about what I've reached on previously within this conversation about the individual's gumption behind a ritual, behind a structure. And I synthesize that with social identity. High levels of social identity being indicative of very pro-social behavior, and that coming from participation, from what we've found in our research, but also what adjacent research has found through structures like rites of passage. And that's the social structure, and the rite and the ritual itself can only do half of the job.
Right.
And so if you take a post-structuralist, very secular observation of a ritual and you say, what are these absurd things going on, like all of this drama and this play and this imitation and this dance and this song, like this is a very weird thing that's going on right now, almost as weird as being bound to pushing up a rock up a hill, like it, okay, so fine, we apply the Sisyphus meaning to that and say there's meaning to be found, but you have to find it.
Yeah.
And that's the individual's,
and in some ways create it yourself.
Right. But I wouldn't say fully.
Yeah.
You have to water the seeds. The seeds are sown within the ground because you stand on those who have lived before you. You stand on the shoulders of giants. You stand on the fertile soil of your culture, and those seeds are there ready for you to water and tend to and prune. But you have to water them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that's so interesting about post-structuralism, because what kind of giants? For instance, this is going to upset and shock a lot of people, but I'm in agreement with Jonathan Pageau that the fact that we treat Hitler as the most evil man of all history is stupid. Mm-hmm. He's just another evil man in history. Mm. He is the most recent. He's not the. When you think of the caricature of the devil, they're supposed to represent everything that is evil.
Right.
Which means, by definition, they should be something more scarier, mm-hmm. or to be afraid of compared to Hitler. And yet that tends to piss a lot of people off because we think of the devil as, it's just a caricature, whereas Hitler is a real person, or was a real person. It's like, okay, but now I'm going to piss people off even more. And I'm not saying Hitler wasn't an evil person. Let me preface with this first. Hitler was a real person. Yes, but the things we say about him, are they real? Or are they just narratives?
Yeah.
That would be the post-structuralist approach, is to be asking, were these really Hitler? Or are they just narratives that we have given so much structure to, so much power, that it has now overshadowed the thing that was Hitler? Because again, a great example is Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm.
We call him Alexander the Great. When we teach about him, we talk about his amazing conquest of building one of the biggest empires the world has ever seen, and at the time was the known world. No one ever talks about that. One of Alexander's common strategies was to walk up to a city and say, surrender and capitulate to me, or by tomorrow, I'll destroy everything. And what he meant by destroy everything, he's going to kill the women, he's going to kill the men, he's going to kill the children. All of it. Gone. Wipe them off the face of the earth. What we would now call, but I would argue we shouldn't use the term because it didn't apply then, genocidal. How come he doesn't get put in the same camp as Hitler?
So I would say if the devil's a archetypal. Now, getting into archetypal analysis, if the devil is the archetype of evil, then in our limited interpretation and perception of history and its archetypes, is Hitler not a caricature of the devil? And that's the contemporary fit to the character role within this mythos that we really haven't escaped, that still permeates from archaic times and archaic mythoses into this mythos.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing that to go back to our previous thing, and again, I think Hitler is an evil person.
Yeah.
To your point, to go back to what we referenced before, we have maximized Hitler to the point that there will never be another evil person to the extent that Hitler was, and there never has been a person as evil as Hitler was, which is like, okay, but that's maximizing the atrocities that Hitler committed, which in and of itself is a narrative that is now gaining new force behind it and power, compared to let's optimize it and say, hey, there are people who've done this in the past to varying degrees, which is all supposed to be a reflection of the archetypal character that we call the devil.
Well,
or evil.
And, let's not shy away from the fact that there was just as much evil figures within the 20th century, if not more evil. Mao is a great example of that.
Yeah.
Hitler had his some level of weird, perverted narrative of his towards the German people. Mao didn't care if his people starved or not.
Yeah, but here's the thing that's actually really scary about Hitler compared to Mao, which is that Mao, Stalin, and Kim Jong-un all believed that this was for the betterment of mankind. That this was a necessary sacrifice that the people themselves would understand to achieve utopia. What's really scary about Hitler's is he has the same narrative, but whereas these three narratives under the communist umbrella are about the betterment of the world, that eventually everyone could join, Hitler's narrative is all for one race at the expense of other races, to the point that there's no problem in killing them. There's a ethnocentric and ethnicity point of view of focus on the German view compared to the three communist views, which is what is really unsettling about the Nazi view, which is why I'm saying he is indeed an evil person.
Yeah.
But you go back to Alexander the Great, his whole thing for violence was that it's all for the benefit of his image of what he is destined to be.
Right.
Everyone else is at an expense, and he believes that it will be for the betterment of the world. The communists are all believing that this is for the benefit of the world, period, not just for themselves.
There's some utopianism, or however you say that word.
Yeah, utopianism.
Utopianism in the communist structure of that.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing that is really shocking to me, that we're still trying to cling on to utopian ideas when the tragedies of the 20th century are fueled by utopianism.
Right.
And yet we don't want to diagnose utopianism as... It's one of the things that's been bothering me the past few weeks is we keep wanting to diagnose symptoms as the cause. And it's like, no, it's a symptom. It's not the cause. If you find the cause, you'll understand where the symptom comes from. But that's what's really difficult about history and everything, that I'm in agreement with the post-structuralists, is what is the root? I can't tell you.
Do we have a trickster of the modern mythos? Like, is there a... You know, we've prefaced that Hitler takes a archetypal weight of the devil and of evil in our modern mythos. Do you think there's a trickster that's saturated with that caricature?
Say more.
I'm thinking, and you know, it's more sophisticated than I'm leading on, because you think of contemporary pantheons, there is abundance of divinities and of demigods and gods. And looking at this modern mythos, I'm sure it's much more complicated. But if there's a social/cultural structure that we've characterized as evil, Nazism, derived from a historical perspective, but concentrated, as you're saying, are there other archetypal concentrations that we have saturated that are historically evident, but concentrated in the sense that we've made them into informative images that guide our operation?
I don't really know how to answer that, because to go back to my previous point of where is the root, is Hitler and the Aryan vision, because it wasn't his idea,
right?
Is the Aryan vision a community that said we are rejecting all tricksters that get in our way? Or was the Aryan idea in and of itself the trickster believing now it could create a community?
And, you know, to specify some other cultural contexts, I would characterize that as the Pied Piper.
Yeah.
He who plays his song and leads the children, the unedified mind, into his direction, which is different than the trickster, in my opinion. The trickster is on the edge of the inside. The Pied Piper goes into the forest.
Yeah, he's on the outside, because the whole point of the trickster is he comes in to solve a problem and then takes as a payment the thing that is of most value to them.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, it's the same as the trickster. It is, I'm only doing what's best for me. But as you said, he's not in any way a part of the society. He's out of it. It's the worst type. But again, the Pied Piper's not trying to build a community. So,
but he wants people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he knows the power in that.
Yeah.
And he knows how much the community he's trying to destroy values that.
Yeah.
That's why he takes the children, I believe, in the story.
Which there's no way of knowing.
Right.
So that's where, again, I'm saying, what is the root? I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see, which I'll never be able to do, as much as analytical philosophy tends to drive me nuts. I do agree with one of the theories, which is the only way to actually know what happened in history is to be able to go back and get a source to actually validate that our interpretation of it is correct.
Right.
Which we can't do.
No.
Was Joseph Campbell really seen as the archetypal figure of wisdom during his time as we tend to talk about him now? In other words, to create a good example of this, do you watch sports?
Hardly.
Okay. It has been amazing growing up and watching sports and getting to see some amazing moments. For instance, I watch F1.
Yeah.
There's some pretty crazy things about F1. 2021 was wild the way that championship ended. But I wouldn't say it's documentary worthy.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, for those, do you watch any documentaries on sports?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen Reggie Miller and the Pacers versus the Knicks?
No, but I know the kind of the style and the thing
Okay.
you're talking about.
It's way bigger than the actual moment happened. But if you talk to people like my dad who grew up during that, they talk about it in the same sense that the documentary hypes it up to be. Meaning the documentary is trying to make it entertaining, which is its job, which means it is slightly to hyperbolizing the actual events. And yet, the people that you talk to, when they see that documentary, treat it as if that documentary is a completely 100% accurate reflection of the events that took place. That's crazy. So what I'm trying to argue is I have no way of actually knowing if Joseph Campbell was as much the wise figure that people claim he was during his time. So I'm not sure I actually could pinpoint someone as being a trickster archetype of our time to even explain any of that. Because, as a good example, many people on the center and to the right would probably argue that Jordan Peterson was a great symbol of wisdom during 2016 to 2020. I know quite a lot of people who would not say that right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, and, to bring up what you've said about this enthusiasm that is infused to experience that may not necessarily reflect such enthusiasm for your sports example. We have a synergy between the myth and the individual's interpretation of the myth. I don't know what's happening there. That's spirited. That's what I mean when I say a myth, a rite of passage and a ritual is spirited on the individual and social level. And sports is a great example because we have rules, we have story, we have almost a myth. Like you have very, very, very close amalgamations to what a archaic man would see as a mythos and a ritual.
Yeah.
Because you have rules, you have order, you have defect, you have compliance, you have all those things. And the same phenomenon that I'm trying to discuss still takes place where you have individuals spirited and motivated and full of gumption towards the structure that they reside within.
Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, how come sports isn't seen as a threat to the open society?
Right.
With you laying that all out. Why? I mean, the only time people get upset and want to break down and destroy everything in sports and its rules is whenever the refs and people aren't following the rules.
Mm-hmm. Is it the implicit and unconscious knowing that this quote-unquote is a game? Because I don't think it is. I don't think it is just a game. But I'm thinking as a culture we may categorize it as, oh, that's entertainment.
Right. Well, the thing that doesn't make sense to me is evolution is itself a structure.
Mm-hmm.
The study of it. How come that isn't considered a threat? Like
Right.
that, to the open society and the post-war consensus with Popper and them, that's actually considered the cornerstone of making sure we never go back,
Mm-hmm.
is to rely on science and technocrats. So you have an odd paradox there.
Which I've shown in the epistemic matrix that
Yeah, you did.
empiricism in and of itself is a structure.
Yes.
It's deductive and a posteriori.
Yeah.
No, sorry, a priori.
Yeah. Yeah, before the fact.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, we accept it as self-evident.
right, those are the boundaries which characterize the structure. If anybody's wondering why I'm saying that science is a structure, those are the defining lines. That's the edge.
Yeah. Well, and Popper sets up the structure very well. It's Popper that gives us the falsifiability theory.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make it falsifiable.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's able to be repeated over and over again, then it's more reliable. I actually don't disagree with Popper on that.
I just ask about modern mythos because obviously the structure still remains, and in a weird way, there are rituals assigned with that structure. There's, I can't think of any examples that come to the top of my head, but I would argue that if you took the meta principles of a ritual and applied it to the social identity found in what we would call post-structuralist thought, it's still there. There's an in-group and an out-group.
Right.
There's a left and a right.
Yeah.
There's tribalism here.
See, but I wouldn't even say what we're in is post-structuralist thought. Because according to the post-structuralists, I'm going to actually lean on Foucault heavily here. They say that a problem should remain problematic. So in other words, the problem we're dealing with now, what is wisdom? We should leave it problematic when we leave. And the reason for that is, if we try and solve the problem and then claim we've solved the problem, there's a chance we could be creating more problems than if we just left it problematic. Meaning, not saying that there's nothing to glean from, that there's nothing to take from it. They're just saying to then try and make a universal claim that we have solved the issue that is wisdom, we will end up causing more problems than we actually will be solving any of the problems, which I would agree with.
Right.
Which is the whole point why gender theory is post-structuralist abstract theory.
Mm-hmm.
And is supposed to remain problematic. And if you read Judith Butler, she never actually solves anything onto what being queer or what gender is.
Cyclical definitions.
Yeah, not fully cyclical. It's more, again, it's trying to glean things off of it. You're just never going to make the claim that you figured it out. Again, as I've said before, it's why Foucault's example of an archaeological site is genius.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a text that says, it talks about an art piece that was valuable to a pharaoh. You then go to the side of the pyramids and you're trying to find this art piece. You find a tomb. You then go down. You find this piece and you go, this looks like it fits all the descriptions of what we have. This is the problem. All you have are words, which is based off of the person's perception that wrote it.
Right.
Just like we've done in this conversation where you've reoriented how I've said things and I've reoriented how you've said things and it's made it more clear, more better. No one didn't do that for that guy when he wrote that down.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they did, it doesn't work for everybody. Okay, we sit there and we then say, we believe we found the artifact based off of the descriptions within this text. We then go a few tombs down. We go in, we find a piece, and we go, this one actually fits the descriptions of the artifact more based off of what is written than the previous one. I can't make the definitive claim all the time that I have found the thing. It must be left as problematic of we have found the thing that is closest to it, not the thing. And that's more of what he's trying to argue. So it doesn't mean you didn't get anything out of that. You absolutely did. You just can't make the dogmatic claim that it is the case.
So in our weird structuralism birthing out of post-structuralism, what we've discussed on this podcast before of trying to build structure out of unstructuredness.
Yes.
And the apparent archetypal caricatures that still exist within our society, and the apparent in-group, out-groups that we have that are inherently tribal. Why do rituals and wisdom cease to proliferate within that structure?
Because, again, there's a fear that those things will become authoritarian or totalitarian. Because the more power behind the narrative that builds, again, going back to game theory, the easier it is to be weaponized against the very thing it was built for.
So we've all become Lokis.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. But I'm not sure see, this is where I am a little post-structuralist. I'm not sure I want to make the claim that that is the case. But that's not saying that post-structuralism isn't saying there isn't a solution. People just don't like post-structuralism's answer. Post-structuralism's answer is accept that there is no absolute meaning. Accept finding the little things. That's all pretty much the post-war consensus is. It's instead of focusing on big worlds, you're focusing on little worlds. And they're saying, as I've said before, stop paying attention and worrying about the war of the gods. Go tend to your garden.
And I agree with that sentiment, and you can see that within research surrounding ritual and contemporary articulations of it. Mappings of meaning become more abstract the more people are involved, because the more experiences you have to inevitably incorporate into the structure and meaning that is trying to be derived. And so families will have rites and rituals, unknowingly, knowingly, that work within a family because there is a set number of experiences that can be encapsulated within that narrative.
Yes.
When you expand that to millions of people, then you risk, to your point, of being authoritarian.
Yes. Well, and again, to emphasize and to use the same metaphor, the reason why post-structuralism is difficult is everyone wants to turn their gardens into gods.
Mm-hmm. And to take that notion further, that a ritual and narrative work better the less people that are in it, we talk about a ritual being spirited.
Yeah.
There's a higher proclivity for that ritual, that narrative, that rite to be spirited, because for something to be spirited, the subject and the object need to be in sync.
Yes.
That narrative needs to be synchronized to one's inner meaning making. And so if there is less experiences that need to be encapsulated within a broader story of a culture, there is a more likely of a chance for that to be quote unquote spirited.
Right.
And an example of where this is not happening, and it's changing, but I have seen, and granted this is anecdotal, Western Catholicism in a weird transient place, because it has all the structure. It has the Eucharist. It has baptismal rites. But it's seen not as ritual and as participation, but as tradition.
That's because they also capitulated to, and I can't remember which pope it was, agreed that the best way for them to move forward was to jump on board with the post-war consensus, which was instead of to keep the big world, to turn everything into little worlds. Which is why you have people like Bishop Barron that are coming out saying, well, now that we've tried this, it seems like more and more people are leaving and not getting any fulfillment out of it. Why would they? So maybe we should return to those bigger things, hence the return of the strong gods.
And Eastern Orthodoxy being a contemporary version that didn't do that. And
correct.
You have draws of people going towards that because that spiritedness is still viable.
Yeah.
Because the structure hasn't stopped watering that.
Yeah.
It's still tended to the ability to synchronize inner and exterior meanings.
Right. Well, and to go down a quick tangent, it's more of an observation. Isn't it interesting that the Protestant umbrella cannot stand Catholicism, and yet they also capitulated and followed the open society post-war consensus model as well, and yet they want to claim that they are different.
And still,
it's just an observation.
Yeah, and still have structure and ritual. They
Yeah.
still participate in they wouldn't say it's the Eucharist.
Yeah.
But communion.
Yeah.
Like, that's a ritual.
Yes. Yeah, but
not in the sense that
it feels really small, though.
Yes. And it feels like, oh, yeah, and that over there.
Yeah.
We do that, too.
Yeah,
because we've always
exactly.
done that.
Yep.
That's what I mean by tradition.
Yeah.
Rather than ritual. And I think there's
Right.
a really big distinction there. I see a lot of young Catholic individuals who are just born Catholic, and that wisdom is not integrated into the participation in the tradition. It's just tradition because it's just what we've always done.
Right. Sorry, my brain, you're like, they were born Catholic. Did you just assume their identity?
Right.
Sorry.
You have to be Catholic because you were born Catholic.
Yeah.
Canceled.
No, I don't, yeah.
If we're not canceled already for
Whatever the hell that means.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Because we have been at it for a bit. I don't know if we'd be able to do this tonight, but I did have an interesting idea. So based off of everything we've discussed, it seems that post-structuralism has some wisdom to it.
Yeah.
Camus' absurdism has some wisdom to it based off of what we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Very not tangible, not something you can just immediately grip onto,
Mm-hmm.
like a ritual or community. But so does tradition and ritual. To me, that would say, because of where the world is, that it can't go back to where these tribes are, which, as you've already said, are smaller than our communities and our societies. How is there a way that we could restore but also bring forth a new structure of wisdom while also holding to the wisdom of post-structuralism that makes sure that that structure never becomes the very problem it was meant to bulwark and board up against? Like, what could we take from each that would actually give us something?
Well, from ritual, the inherent integration that happens is the life that it breathes onto its participants. Within post-structuralism, the ability to incorporate the hyper-relativity and subjectivity of experience is the life that it breathes into individuals and experience. Where we have found the most conflating factors are that in order to develop meaning that stands outside of more than one individual, you have to build some form of narrative, some structure. But contrasting to that, post-structuralism would argue that inadvertently contradicts the hyperrelativity that is inherent within its perspective.
Okay, so then I guess the question would be, does post-structuralism even have a place in wisdom?
It's the transient ability for the subject to align itself to some narrative is the function, I believe, post-structuralism plays here. The knowing that subjectivity is subjective is the thing that spirits a ritual. Because knowing that you can align yourself to a story gives you the ability to be part of something.
Mm.
I don't know if that gives enough credit to post-structuralism.
I was thinking more in the sense, it seems post-structuralism is a great tool for the tricksters.
Yes.
But I'm thinking more in the sense of a Zarathustrian trickster.
Mm-hmm.
One that is not only seeking its self-benefit while being a part of this society, but also being something that very much cares about society. But, and I'm kind of realizing with everything you just laid out, maybe that's kind of the journey we're going on here, is trying to figure out what this new form of wisdom is going to be. Because, and maybe this can be our next topic, I see a lot of the collective unconscious. I know people tend to treat it as a very mystical idea, but you think about the 70s and the 80s, I mean, that's a decade of, we are propping up those who are not following the system as the people to follow, because they highlight what is wrong with the system. So everybody wanted to emulate that. That's a collective unconscious. That shows that there's something collectively that they are all sharing between them, and that is governing the direction that they are going, whether they know it or not. And it does beg the question, should the trickster going forward, which kind of defeats the point of the archetype, but maybe that's a good thing, should they be aware of such a concept of a collective unconscious?
I don't think that it degrades the archetype in its entirety, because that's being in the inside still. Being able to traverse and shift the rules while still knowing the rules that you're shifting.
So an adaptation to the advancement of society, that if they really want to still be even on the outskirts a part of it, because of how much the society thinks about itself, it needs to be aware of that.
Yes.
In order to function as a trickster.
Yes.
Okay.
And what that looks like for where we're moving, I don't know, because I think right now collectively we're in a place where the trickster has just revealed the inadequacies, and we're feeling the tension of that come forward collectively.
Yeah. Well, and I ask a question that's almost impossible, because I think about our greatest thinkers. Nietzsche's really amazing when you think about it. This is a guy that's showing all that's wrong with society and saying we could be something more, and this is the direction we could go. Yeah. But at the same time, like everybody else, he's not saying exactly what that thing is.
Right.
He's leaving it up for his readers based off of what has been found at fault to decide what should be done. I can't really think, and not that a whole lot of, if anyone can think of one, I would really appreciate it. And even if you have one, I can't think of a huge influence, like an influential thinker, that their whole shtick, so to say, isn't on what is to be. It's thinking on how things were and how things are, or how they've always been. Like, I can't think of any thinkers that are trying to build something of how the future will be, because Marx isn't writing about how the future should be. He's creating a social science on how things were in the past, and saying, based off of what we know from the past, we could then analyze this and come up with a better way to make societies function. But he never tells exactly what that society is going to be. Nietzsche says that the future will bring about free-minded, free-will, free-minded, free thinkers. But he never says what they are. Kant just describes things as he sees them to be and how they've always been. Because again, it's metaphysics, trying to figure out how the world works. Kierkegaard is describing how we function as the way things are based off of how things have been. I can't think of anybody that's actually talking about how things will be.
Before I answer, I want to just know that I'm interpreting it correctly. You don't know of a trickster who's been able to both highlight what is wrong, what has been, and what can be, all three facing
So I'm not just saying a trickster. I'm saying
thinker.
Even just a thinker or the wise man archetype. I can't think of anyone that their whole thing was based on this is how the world is, by studying it how it is at the moment and the past, or saying this is how the world used to be. I can't think of people that are talking about how the world is going to be.
I want to connect to these ideas further too, because I think to be wise you need to have a little bit of the trickster mentality.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
That's wisdom. Part of that, being a wise,
At least knowing that it's needed.
yeah, the wise individual has or is some form of a trickster.
Gandalf.
Right. And so these qualities that we've talked about inadvertently of wisdom and of the trickster are of a similar mode of archetypal behavior. And I have a propositional answer for that. And that's why I wanted to clearly define what you were asking. Is Christ.
Oh, that's a good question. Okay.
Because Christ was a trickster.
He was. He was also wise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go through the model I set up, and now we can actually define the model more accurately to see if he checks it, or checks it, breaks it, or just breaks it. Is Christ talking about what man is capable of being, or is he basing that off of how humans are now, or how they've always been?
Yes.
Okay.
Because, referencing scripture, pick up your cross and follow me. That's an active participation in what you can do right now.
But is he saying what that's going to look like, or is he just saying pick up your cross and follow me and you're going to figure that out on your own?
I think he does, within his prophetic nature, talking about the kingdom and those very forward-facing things of... and, I want to... preface to the readers that I think that there is 1,000 faces that we can put towards his interpretation of his sayings and what he brought to the world. And so I don't think within this conversation we're trying to interpret exactly what he's saying, but what he did when he said it.
Right. Well, again, is he describing in detail what that kingdom is going to be? And I'm not saying the kingdom afterwards to come. I'm saying here. What is man to look like from here going on out?
When I think in his apostles and there's particular scripture that references, the kingdom is at hand. It is done when he is on the cross.
Yeah.
It is finished. And there is and that's the whole point of admonishing sins and the cleansing that he brought. What you have done and what you are doing that is sinful is finished through me.
Right. So then it seems Christ is not doing anything different than anyone else. And I'm not saying that in a sense to probably just offended people. I'm saying that sense of maybe that's just the best way we learn. So, for instance, what I'm saying is if this is a project we take on of what is wisdom to be, it's never been done in the sense of what is wisdom going to be. It's more of creating a structure based off of what is now, of what would be the best form to create as wisdom moving forward, knowing people are going to have to pick up their cross and follow and see where it goes. In other words, to loop this all around now, wisdom's not going to tell you where the right way to go is. Wisdom's going to give you information on, as a guide, of what is the best route to go. But you still have to, based off of the context of what's made, make that decision. In other words, if you're trying to take a trip somewhere and someone tells you, well, this is the best route to go, it doesn't mean there isn't going to be construction that screws up the entire route that you were given. You still have to take the information you were given in order to now forge the path to get to the destination.
Mm-hmm. The application of the knowledge derived.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, to the listeners, I think that what we're saying is that many times has the problem been rectified in the present moment. And I intuitively and with further digging feel as if Christ did that and that's why it was so impactful. He did do what we're talking about. What that looks like and the details of that, I don't think I'm qualified enough to.
I don't know if anyone is.
Right. But beside Christ, I don't think that what you're saying has been done. And I leave Christ in a different context because I think that's a silo full of worms to open.
Yes, because to bring in your whole idea of inductive and deductive, wisdom is not deductive.
Right.
It can be.
It's inductive by nature.
But it's inductive by nature. Yes, exactly. And if it would not make sense for Christ to then create a deductive thing out of something he knows is inductive.
Mm-hmm.
So I would then argue Christ hasn't done anything different than the other thinkers. Because Descartes thought he was bringing on something that was going to change the way we're thinking about things. Okay, well, so did Christ. Since it is inductive by nature, to use the classic example that was given to me, I saw a blank amount of seagulls on the beach today. All of them were white. Therefore, seagulls must be white. How many do you need to convince yourself that?
And I want to highlight, too, that what we're saying is not restricting the importance of Christianity in that sense. But I think, without getting overly theological, Christ came to become human. He did what was most efficient for the way in which paradigms shift.
Yes.
Playing the part of the trickster.
Yes, but based off of the idea that he took on man himself in sin. Well, see, now we are going down a little bit of a theological rabbit hole, which is, as I should just read the book again and we should discuss it. Answer to Job points out, God is incapable of understanding, it seems, the fallen nature of man. He's very vengeful, very righteous. Christ then takes on man, and now there seems to be a better understanding of the struggles and limitations of man. In other words, as Jung points out, you have something that can see everything and doesn't know how to see outside of that. You have something that can only see what it sees but can't see outside of that. In other words, God cannot see through the eyes of man, man cannot see through the eyes of God. And then Christ comes, and now he can see through both the eyes of God and the eyes of man. it would not make sense for a being who has... I'm not sure if you knew this, but this is Nietzsche's perspectivism. He's saying that there is no one eye, a God's eye, that mankind can see out of. And of course, he doesn't believe there's a God, so he doesn't believe that there's a God's eye that sees everything. But to play with this idea, if God has the God's eye, but doesn't see through the individual perspectives of all of mankind once they sin, because he can't be a part of that, and then Christ takes that on, Christ now can see both, or at least inform both. So then why would he try and force God's eye on mankind, knowing they couldn't handle such a thing? As a matter of fact, it was them wanting that God's eye, you could argue, that tempted Eve to have the fruit, to find, as we're more than aware of, we don't have that. We're incapable. So it would make sense that it would follow the same thing of, okay, well, you have Kant who's arguing this is the way the world is structured. It's the best way to understand it. And Christ comes in and goes, well, no, this is the nature of man. Be aware of that. Now pick up your cross and follow me. And these are the things you have to look forward to. He's not saying anything we haven't really, choose my words carefully, he's not saying anything we haven't heard before in what man is capable of. It's the heights that can reach that we haven't seen before, hence the whole idea of the saints.
Well, and what a beautiful synthesis that we're looking for of structure and post-structure. Because Christ says this is the nature of man. That's the post-structuralist argument. We've created and destroyed 10,000 cathedrals of thought. This is the nature of man. Now pick up your cross and follow me.
Yes.
And so that's why I make the argument, and I love that we kind of went through a little bit of that he did do more than the trickster and some.
But there is a level of post-structuralist the other way around too, because he's saying this is the nature of man, so this is the structure. And he's saying, now pick up your cross and follow me. That's no structure. That's saying you're going into a structureless world to then figure out how to follow Christ in that. So we're seeing, to your point, structure but no structure, and structure no structure on both sides. So whether or not you agree with theology or religion, using it as a metaphor, it would then seem we've answered our question that post-structuralism does have a place in wisdom. And technically, post-structuralism is a antithesis in some ways to structuralism. I might get in trouble for saying that. Which would mean, to go back to Star Wars, it was believed when Anakin destroyed the Jedi, enjoyed the dark side, that the prophecy was false, that he would not bring balance to the Force. And then he kills the Emperor, and in the process dies, eliminating the dark side within the galaxy for that time period. Therefore, he has brought balance to the Force. So there was a structure to the prophecy, but no way of knowing how the prophecy was going to turn out. It could go any way it needed to. It could be influenced, but there was still going to be balance to the Force. So it would seem post-structuralism does have a place, because it is a returning to the archaic. Maybe that's why Hale likes post-structuralism and why he likes Mircea Eliade. It's because it is a returning to the archaic. So then I think post-structuralism is a great tool for the tricksters.
Yes.
Because it gives a tool for a Zarathustrian trickster who actually does care about the society, even though it doesn't function well within it, to then be able to analyze it and correct where it goes wrong. And I don't know about you. I consider myself a bit of a trickster archetype. I mean, how many times have you tried to get me to go to club?
Yeah.
I mean, Philosophy Club tries to get me to go to club too. And I tend to hang out on the outside. But I don't think of the world in terms of this is how it should be. I tend to think of, well, for instance, to use you an example, if you thought that this is how things structure and that's how you should behave, I'm not going to judge you based off of someone else's structure. I'm going to judge you based off of your structure. So if you don't meet that, I'm going to be like, he's really wondering why things aren't working when he's claiming this is how it's structured, but he's not even following his own structure to see if it actually is that structure.
Well, and I love how you've phrased that Christ is kind of the integrated model of structure and non-structure within a wise trickster, highlighting and fulfilling yet breaking prophecy.
Well, and to take the whole concept of yin and yang, chaos and order, if you want to claim that God is only order, I'm sorry, I'm going to call bullshit on that. If Adam and Eve did not sin, to play with this metaphor, you still have the chaos of the cosmos to contend with. And it is because of that chaos that there is beauty in it. But there's also beauty in the order.
And so what the nexus of that becomes is mystery. And I don't use that word in unknowing, but in the way that Orthodoxy has used, in the way that contemplative prayer, Desert Fathers have used. The mystic quality that where opposites meet, where contention unifies in a thing that is beyond our perception.
Yeah, which you already gave an example, which is we would be the chaos, God the order, and it took that contention for Christ to then unify the two.
Christ being the mystery in that.
Yeah, exactly.
So we head off to the mystery next?
Guess we head off to the mystery next, whatever that is. I mean, I will say that for me, I always cringe and have a little bit of fear whenever someone tells me, eventually we're going to figure this all out and nothing's going to ever have any question. And I say, I sure hope not. Because whenever we reach that point, if we ever reach that point, I hope the sun destroys itself and the planet dies shortly after, because I don't think when all the answers are done that people are going to be happy, content, and full of meaning. Part of me thinks that it is that mystery of the unknown that gives people meaning. Now I'm bringing in Camus.
And I would bring in a contemporary contemplative of the 20th century, Thomas Merton, who has said in one of his writings that the mystic is much more comfortable with unknowing than knowing.
Well, and that is actually at the heart of post-structuralism, is saying, accept that there are no answers, accept that there is unknown, and learn to live in it. And you will find your meaning in that.